Here we are. Okay. Well, like I said, hello everybody. It's nice to be here. I use Zoom a lot in my life, and the hiccups that can happen with Zoom are countless. But when it works, it's really, really good. So it looks like it's working now, and we'll just get started with this. I'm Kim Flottum. I work with a few other people on outfit called Growing Planet Media, and we host the podcast called Beekeeping Today Podcast.com. And if you want to go look for it, just beekeepingtodaypodcast.com, and that'll take you right to it. We're starting our third year on this, and we actually have a lot of fun. Today I want to talk about honeybee nutrition, and unless you've been under a rock on a different planet, you know that nutrition is one of the things that are causing lots of problems with bees. You know, pesticides and predators and all of these things, but nutrition is big on the list of giving bees problems. So what I want to look at today are some of the things we that are causing the problems and some of the things that we can do to manage honeybee nutrition so that you have healthy bees all of the time. So you boil it down to a nutshell. Honeybee nutrition means having enough good food for enough good food all the time for every bee in the bunch. Any questions? That kind of sums it up. But what I want to do is I want to be able to show and talk about how we can get to that situation, because right now I'm going to bet that most of the people that are listening to this do not have enough good food all of the time for every bee in their bunch all of the time. And what can we do about that? So one of the things I want to give you a kind of a basic fundamental feel for how much food it takes to feed a bee. There's a guy named Dr. Albert Jaycox. He's an extension entomologist like Dave Tarpey is. He's an extension entomologist in Illinois. And he used to write for our magazine until he retired. But what his research found over the years is that it takes a cell of pollen, a cell of honey, and a cell of water to make a bee. That's from egg to the time she crawls out of the cell. So you can figure if you've got 50,000 bees in your colony and the height of your population, somewhere along the line, you've had 50,000 cells of pollen, cells of honey, and cells of water. And every day you need more of them. And bees, that's what keeps bees busy. Not only that, but they make excess honey. But they need minimum a cell of pollen, a cell of honey, and a cell of water to make a bee. And there what you're looking at right there is honeybee's meat and potatoes. She's in the middle of a flower. She's got pollen on her body, and she's sucking nectar. This is about as good as it gets for a honeybee most times. So let's take a look at the meat and potatoes. Here's the meat coming up, and of course the protein in a bee's life comes from pollen. It has fats and vitamins and minerals and especially proteins. All of these things. When you take a look at the nutritional elements that are hidden in pollen, or pollens, I should say, the list wouldn't fit on the screen. There's so many things that bees need, you need, I need, everybody needs in their diet, comes from pollen. And like I said, fats, vitamins, minerals, and especially proteins. These are the amino acids. This is what makes life work for all of us. The amino acids that deal with making muscle, making DNA, making all of the things that we need, they all come from this. Now, and this is what's in protein. Amino acids are what make up proteins. Now, when you look at pollens, they're all over the map, just like every other kind of food in the universe. You can have McDonald's, which has almost no good food, and you can have the best food in the universe. Most pollens run 20 to 25% crude protein. Some of the better ones have 30 plus. We're going to look at some of those in a minute here. Now, I raise chickens too. Not a lot of them, but I've got chickens, and the chickens deal really well on 16% crude protein. They do better with 20%. So when you're looking at what are your bees feeding at, and you can Google this and go on the internet and say, what's the protein content of the pollen of, and then name the plant, and somewhere somebody has already measured that and it will come up. So if you can see that if your bees are feeding on mostly this, and you look it up. And right now, one of the things that they're feeding a lot of on is corn pollen. We're going to look at how bad that is for bees. But earlier in the spring, when you've got legumes and some of those things, the crude protein percent is really high. And if you know that your bees are collecting low percentage crude protein, what you want to look at is, are they getting enough? And is the stuff that they're storing now is going to be the stuff that they're carrying in the winter? And maybe I need to think about getting some other stuff into them. So take a look at that. Most colonies deal with 55 to 120 pounds of pollen a year. And if you've ever lifted an ounce of pollen, you know how much volume it takes. So you know how much pollen 120 pounds is going to be. For every 10 grams of protein needed for a bee, a colony is going to have to collect 48 grams of 30% protein, or 72 grams if it's only 20% crude protein. So you can see that the diet that they have is dictated by the environment that they're in. And the worse the environment, the worse their diet, the more they're going to have to work. And even high crude protein pollens may have an imbalance of amino acids. We're going to look at some of these things in a minute. If you've got a problem, you're going to see brood reduction if there's not enough pollen collected, no matter the crude protein percent. I mean, there just isn't enough food in the fridge. Or the crude protein percent is below 20%, no matter how much they collect. If you're stacking it in the living room and it's not doing them any good, it doesn't make any difference how much they have. It has to be enough good food all of the time, like I said earlier. The other thing that's in pollen are fats, cholesterol needed for brood rearing. We all have cholesterol. I bet you a lot of us, myself included, have too much cholesterol in our diet, but you need some in your diet, and bees are no exception. And the higher the fat content in a pollen, the more bees are going to seek it out. It's highly attractive to foragers. Just think about where in their diet they get fat, and you're going to see that the only place that they're going to get it is in the pollen. But I want to tell you something in a minute. I'm going to do an aside here. We talked to a lady today on our podcast who's studying the fact, why do bees drink dirty water? That's what her topic was. And one of the things that she found is they easily were able to find bees that were eating dead animals, honey bees eating dead animals, and it's for the fat that they're getting from the meat that they bit off small pieces of meat, took it back to the hive, and were able to consume it. Believe it or not, I was amazed when I heard that. But if you tune into her podcast coming down the next couple of weeks, you'll see what she's mean. Proteins also have high microbial activity, and one of the things that's really coming to light with bee diets is some of the pesticides that they're running into really take a toll on their biome, their digestive biome. There's 8 or 9 different kinds of bacteria that live in a honeybee's gut, and some of these pesticides and fungicides and herbicides destroy some of that biome, which means that they can't digest the food that they're eating. There could be the best food in the world out there, and their biome won't let them digest it. It won't dissolve the shell around the pollen. It won't be able to use the stuff that's in the inside to be able to break it down to the amino acids that they need. So the biome, and there are products, strong microbials is one of them, but there are products out there that can reintroduce these bacteria into their biome so bees are able to be healthy. And one of the things that I found out is that commercial beekeepers in this country have jumped on that like a duck on a bug, because they found out that when I put this stuff on, it's not free, it's not expensive, but it's not free. But when they put this stuff on a colony, the colony picks up now, because they're seeing that before I only had a third of the biome in my gut, and I could only digest a third of the food, and suddenly I can digest all of it. So it's also high in lipids, fatty acids, sterols, and phospholipids. And these are the compounds that are required for membrane growth in a bee, and linoleic acid inhibits American foul brood and the European foul brood. It gives them some resistance to this. And this is something the USDA worked on for a lot of years out of the Beltsville when Dr. Shimanuki was there. They looked at linoleic acid as a natural treatment for AFB and EFB because it inhibited the growth. The cells were, the spores were in the hive, but because of this compound, they weren't able to germinate. They weren't able to spread the disease. They didn't get anywhere yet, but know that pollens have these, and it inhibits, it gives you some resistance to AFB and EFB. There's lots of minerals in pollen: potassium, phosphorus, magnesium. All insects, and you and me, need all of these things. But here's an interesting concept. Too much sodium, calcium, or sodium chloride is detrimental. Doctor tell you to cut the fat out of your diet? Sound familiar? Exactly right. But here's an interesting concept. This lady that we were talking to about eating dirty water found out that the compounds that bees seek out change seasonally. There's hardly any minerals in the pollens and nectars that they collect in the spring into early summer. Late summer and fall, they start picking up everything they can to get as much sodium into their diet as they can. She doesn't know why yet, but it was interesting to hear her say that their foods change, and it's not because the foods that are available, they just have more salt in the fall. It's given a choice. Bees will take the higher sodium food in the fall rather than in the spring and early summer. They got to have some ash, and what ash is it's essentially undigestible fiber in your diet. Some is good, too much is bad. You've got a little fiber in your diet. Sometimes your doctor says you need more, but if you make more, you know what the result is. So they need some, but they don't need too much, but they have to have some. So when bees are looking for food, these are the things. It isn't just pollen and they find some and bring it home. It's the pollen they were looking for because of the necessary requirements in their diet and at the time of year. So it's a little more complicated than we give them credit for. It's also vitamins: B complex, A and K, essential for hypopharyngeal gland and brood development. I'm going to ask a question here, and you're not going to be able to tell me, but how many people here collect pollen? And it's amazing how many people, when I go and talk to a group of 100 people, 2 will raise their hand. 2% of the beekeepers in the U.S. collect pollen. And I can't believe it. I simply can't believe it. It's free food. It's the best food there is that you can feed your bees, and only 2% of the beekeepers in this country collect pollen. So next year, get a pollen trap. Put it on the bottom of your hive. Put it on for 2 days, take it off for a week. Put it on for 2 days, put it off, and when you take it, you put it on for 2 days. At the end of 2 days, you put it in a bag and you throw it in your freezer. Bees don't care if it's not clean when you feed it to them next spring. They're just going to go, thank you, thank you, thank you. So get a pollen trap. It's the best cheap food that you can feed your bees. If you are going to store this pollen, what I said is what to do is put it in the freezer. It doesn't change chemically hardly at all, a little bit. But if you dry it, the vitality and the vitamins and the quality of the compounds in those vitamins drops right off the edge of the table. People like it because it's easy to use. And you can sell them dried pollen, and they sprinkle it on their cereal in the morning, and they think they're doing really good. Well, they are, but they could be a lot better if it had been frozen and it was mush, and they put it on their cereal, because all of the stuff that was there when the bees collected it is still there after being in the freezer, and they have it for breakfast. What happens when you have a pollen deficiency? Whoops, let me go back. Hit the wrong button. There we go. There we go. What happens when you have a pollen deficiency? There's not enough pollen coming in for whatever reason. There's no plants blooming. There's not enough foragers, whatever the reason is. Right off the bat, you get reduced brood production overall, because brood is a high consumer of the proteins that are in pollen. The workers that manage to make it through brood development and emerge as adults don't live as long. It takes longer for drones to reach maturity, and that means that because there isn't much protein in the colony, they're not being fed much. And because they're not fed much, it takes them longer to reach maturity. As a result of that, they're not as strong flyers. They have reduced fertility. If it gets really critical, the workers in that colony make a choice and they say, guys, we don't care. You're out of here. And they get neglected, discarded, or even eaten for the protein that's in their body. Now, there's not a good way to go if you want to know personally. Fewer drones if you're raising queens is going to give you poor mating and queen supersedure, and eventually if you get no input of protein or very little, not enough input, your colony is going to starve. So that's what happens when you see a pollen deficiency. Here's some common pollen sources, and I certainly don't have them all, but what I wanted to point out is the protein percent and some of the issues with the content. Canola, 23%. Remember what I said, 20 is good, 30 is better. Buckwheat, 11%. That's almost not worth collecting. It's got a minimum number of amino acids. Sunflower has got a lot, tons of pollen on sunflower flowers, but it's only 15%. Lavender, 19%, but it's short on the isoleucine, which is one of the ones you really want to see. Alfalfa, 21%. What you're going to see on these lists, I got a couple more lists coming up, is that the blank, what's the word? The alfalfa and all of the plants in that the alfalfa plant family tend to be high crude protein percent. Pine, don't bother. It's an inch thick on your car in the spring when the cones start shedding, but it isn't worth the effort to collect. Almonds, 26% crude protein. Now that's pretty good stuff. And if you're a beekeeper who takes bees to almonds in California, this is the time of year they're raising a lot of brood, and you've got a big store of really protein-rich pollen. Pears, 26%, pretty good. Raspberries, blackberries, not bad, 20%. Clover, again, the legumes, 25% crude protein. Blueberries, 14%. Blueberries got a lot of problems with the things that go on with them. Beans, again, 22%, not too bad. Corn, 15%, which is what you're probably seeing right now, or maybe it's even done if tasseling is done. Corn is tasseling in Ohio right now, and just about done. And you'll have, you walk through a cornfield and you come out yellow because of all the pollen that's being shed. It isn't worth the time to save. Peas, another legume, 30%. How much better can you get? Willows, 18%. Not so good, but in the spring, it's about as good as you're going to get. The locust, 25%, another legume. Now, here's what I want to talk about. All of this stuff that these bees are collecting, the pollen and the nectar, we're going to talk about nectar in a minute, but all of this stuff that bees are collecting, the foods that they're bringing home are converted in their bodies to a storable, digestible product and segregated out of the hemolymph and stored in the fat body. And Dr. Sam Ramsey is the person who discovered this. And I'll tell you this, you want to hear him talk about this, it's the most fascinating hour you will listen to. We talked to him on our podcast, and it's the most fascinating hour you will listen to. What I want you to look at here is two things. One is, on the right is a bee, is a dissected bee with a really, really rich fat body. And on the left is a bee with no fat body at all. The other thing I want you to look at is you can see where the segments are on these bees. And if you know where Varroa hide on bees, they hide under the segments, right at that juncture point where you can see the lines on the bees. And they're right down there. It's just easy for them to stick their feeder in and suck out the fat body, the contents of the fat body. They hide under the covering on the segment. Bees can't get them. They're stuck inside, and they're just, here I am. I'm here for lunch, and thank you. We're going to talk a little bit more about this fat body in a minute, but take a look at this and you can see why bees like fat bodies. They're easy to get to. This is where all the food is in a bee. Hemolymph is water mostly. And the fat body is where all of the food is. This is where the good stuff is. And if you're a varroamite, this is where you want to go. All right, let's talk about the potatoes, the meat and the potatoes. Let's take a look and see what's going on with the carbohydrates in the environment for bees. Nectar, of course, is the carbohydrates, primarily sucrose, sugar, and water. That's what nectar mostly is. But this breaks down to fructose and glucose, which promote crystallization. The more you have of one, the less, the more likely that the honey is able to crystallize. Of course, you have to have water, and nectar is about 80-20 water sugar, and it's got to be reduced down to about 80-20 sugar water. So they have to get rid of most of the water in there. If they don't, it's going to ferment. You've got mead in the comb. The sugar concentration of most nectars ranges from 5 to 75%, and it's averaging about 25 to 40%. And so you can figure that the good stuff is closer to 40, 75 would be better. Honey is 80% sugar, 83% sugar. So if you can get nectar that's 75% sugar, look how much water they don't have to worry about to get rid of. But there's other things going on in nectar. There's 7 other kinds of sugars. There's proteins, amino acids, there's enzymes, lipids, organic acid, vitamins, and antioxidants. There's minerals, calcium, copper, potassium, magnesium, manganese, sodium, phosphorus, zinc. When you look at the richness of nectar and then you compare it to the sugar water that we feed them, it isn't even on the same scale. It isn't even on the same page in terms of value. Sugar syrup or high fructose corn syrup is not and never will be as good as nectar, period. Know that when you're feeding sugar syrup, that they're not getting in that sugar syrup all of this good stuff in their diet. So either you have to figure out how to get this good stuff in their diet some other way, or you know that you're going to have a problem because they're not getting this, and this is all they're getting is a sweet. One worker needs about 11 milligrams of sugar per day. So a 50,000 population colony is going to eat a pound of sugar or a half a gallon of 25% nectar per day just for the adults. That's not for the brood. They're going to a pound of sugar a day is what they need just to keep the adults going. A 50,000 colony population colony is going to eat about 350 pounds of sugar per year. Now, if you look at that and you figure, okay, that's sugar. Honey is about 80% sugar and 20% water right in there. So how much honey is that? It's going to be another couple 100 pounds of honey that they're going to eat just to get that much sugar. You and I, we average about 22 teaspoons of sugar a day, 77 pounds a year. I have to admit, I have cut that down. It was hard. It's still hard. It's hard every day, but I'm down to less than 77 pounds a year. And I feel better for it. It's good, and some of it's good for you, but too much of it isn't. So take a look at that. Nectar flows. When you've got a nectar flow on, and you've all seen this, it stimulates hygienic behavior because when nectar's coming in, they have to have a place to put it when it comes into the colony, and they're not going to put it in a dungy old brood comb cell or something that's full of whatever. So they start cleaning the cells in the colony. Once they start cleaning the cells in the colony, then that's going to stimulate brood production because they got enough food to feed them and a place to put them. And the population begins to expand. Additional brood, of course, is going to mean I need more food. I need more pollen. I need more protein. I need more nectar. But earlier, before the expansion started, there wasn't much demand for pollen, and suddenly there aren't enough bees to gather pollen. A nectar flow in a colony that's not got any stresses going on. It's got enough room and enough bees. It's one bunch of happy bees. You can't imagine what's going on in a colony in a nectar flow when you've got all of these things fall into place. What happens if you don't? Well, the first thing that happens is defensiveness picks up. Ever go into a colony on a day about 4 days after the nectar flow stopped, and there's nothing coming in, and there's a lot of kids to feed, and because it was going really good, and suddenly it stopped, and you've got a lot of kids to feed, and you take the cover off, and they're all looking at you going, I don't think so. You're not taking any of our food. I got kids here to defend, and I got food to defend. I don't want to be robbed. When nectar flow stops, what happens is there's a realignment in the foraging population, in that a lot of the pollen foragers turn into nectar foragers. So suddenly they're looking for something else besides pollen. So you've got a lot more bees going out looking for nectar, and not nearly as much pollen coming in. But there's going to be some, because you still got kids to feed. If you don't have a lot of food coming in, you don't have to have a lot of cells cleaned out, and the hygienic behavior in the colony begins to drop off. Reduced hygienic behavior, what happens? You're not cleaning out dead bees. You're not cleaning out diseased bees. You've got disease problems beginning to show up. The brood nest begins to shrink, and if it doesn't get fixed, you're going to have starvation. And I'm seeing a note here that says meeting times 9 minutes and 23 seconds. Is that correct? All right, well, we'll try and squeeze this into 9 minutes and 13 seconds. I want to talk a bit.
I certainly hope not.
Traditional Zoom meetings are 45 minutes long or 40 minutes long. So if you don't have it expanded, you may have a problem. So if I go away suddenly, guys, maybe we can pick this up later. Anyway, water. On a hot day, a big colony is going to use between a half a gallon and a gallon of water on a day. And I want to talk to you about something about virtual water. And this is the water it takes to grow the plants that the bees are getting the nectar from. And up at the top, you can say it takes a little over a gallon of water to produce a single almond. So the next time you have a bag of almonds, think of how much water you're consuming. It takes about 53 gallons of water to produce enough nectar to produce a pound of honey. You know how much nectar you have to produce? You know, nectar is 80% water and 20% sugar. So 53 gallons of water to produce enough nectar to produce a pound of honey. So when you're looking at water and rainfall and all of these things, know that there's the shortages kind of drift downstream, if you will, and it's going to affect everything in the environment. What else are bees eating? Fungicides, pesticides, herbicides. You know, I mentioned one of the things I mentioned is these are the chemicals that give the bees' biome a hard problem, and it's because the bees consume something that's in the environment that's got these chemicals in it. It goes into their digestive system, and suddenly you don't have a digestive system, or not one nearly populated enough. Why? You know, and when you look at land use in the U.S., you know, it starts in the upper left-hand corner. That's what it used to be. In the upper right-hand corner now, there's a whole lot of. A friend of mine, a commercial beekeeper in South Dakota, said pavement is the last crop, and he about nailed it right there. We've got too many roads, too many parking lots, too many lawns, too many. And what used to be, all of those things used to be bee food. Why don't you take a look at that map that's got that dark line on the edges of it. 40% of the U.S. population lives on that dark line. That's 50 miles from a body of water. And 60% of us live in the middle. So we've got a lot of land compared to what they have. But when you look at food distribution here in the middle, where are you going to, you know, it's all being trucked to here on the edge. That's where the consumption is taking place. So not only is it inefficient where we have our people and food produced, but it's just, it's expensive to be able to have to live like that. Monocultures are efficient for food production, but they're not efficient for much else when it comes to biodiversity and the environment. We all know that. Corn, soybeans, canola, almonds, whatever you want. When you've got acres and acres and acres and acres of them, and you put bees there, of course they're going to make lots and lots of canola honey, lots and lots of almond honey. But you took a look at that list of honeys a few minutes ago, and each almond honey is really good in protein, but it's lacking some of the amino acids. And corn pollen has essentially almost no protein. So monocultures are good for farmers and they're not so good for bees. And I'll tell you something, just write this down because it makes perfect sense. What's good for the beekeeper is almost never good for the bees. And what's good for the bees is almost never good for the beekeeper. And there's a perfect example. One of the things that we've done is take a lot of land out of diverse plantings and put it into fuel production, the stuff that they make out of corn. And so it's not even food. It's something else, and bees don't get to use it, and we don't get to use it. I want to talk about nutrition management very quickly. Why are or should you be feeding? And if you're looking for spring buildup, of course, the cardinal rule is you should have natural food. You were trapping pollen last summer, so you've got a lot of pollen to feed them, and you didn't harvest all of your honey, so you got a lot of honey to feed them, right? Yeah, we all do that. So if you have to feed, and these are the things to think of. If you're looking for spring buildup because you want to get them a jump start on the springs to have a big population for those early honey flows, you're going to be feeding them sugar and protein. Package, nuke, or split production, same thing. You can see the list there. What are you feeding, when, and why? And that's what you want to, before you just stick something on because everybody said so, think about what you're feeding them, when, and why. If you want to stimulate a buildup, here's something that you're going to think is weird, and I'll go back to if it's good for the bees, it's probably not good for the beekeeper. Most of us put a gallon, 2 gallon, 5 gallon feeder on a colony and walk away. Bees don't get food 24/7, 365. They have to work for it every day. It comes in during the day and they process it at night. It comes into the day and they process it at night. So if you're feeding for a stimulated buildup, try a half a part of sugar to 1 part of water. Nectar is 80-20, 80-20 water sugar. Why are we feeding 2 to 1 or 1 to 1 if we're looking for a buildup? That's not what they're getting in the spring. You got to go out there more often. Go out there with a small container and go out there every day. Like I said, good for the bees, not good for the beekeeper. Feed several small amounts several times. And you've ever seen open feeding? That's not a good way. You're going to just share everything with every bee in the county that way. They're all going to come and look for food, and suddenly everybody's got everything. If you're looking for stimulation for package, nuke, or split feeding, what you want is natural food. Get that pollen trap on next year. The real thing is always the best choice. That's your first choice. But if you can't get that, then you're going to be using sugar, water, or high fructose corn syrup, and you're going to be using one of the pollen substitutes. And I don't know which is the best substitute. I've tried them all, and they all work pretty well. But side-by-side comparison, I can't tell you because I can't find 2 colonies that are equal at the beginning. You know, they're always different. So you put a patty on, and the one that was stronger, of course, gets stronger, and the one that wasn't. So to me, they're all pretty much the same. I don't see a difference in one or the other. When are queens raised? Right at the beginning of the season. What kind of honey is coming in? It's going to be a light mix, light syrups, which stimulates a lot of royal jelly production, which is what you want for queen production. If you want pollen collection, give them all the carbohydrates they can have. That way, they don't even have to forage for carbohydrates. They're going to go out and collect nothing but pollen, and that's what what beekeepers for almond pollination do. And it looks like I've got 1 minute and 29 seconds giving until next spring. If you see what you see on the bottom and there's no fat body, you got a problem. But it's only Thanksgiving. You can still get some food in there. You can get pollen and honey or pollen supplement and sugar if you have to. But this will tell you. And then take a look and see if there's a difference between that strong colony and that weak colony. And see if you don't see that more of the bees in the weak colony look like the one on the bottom, and more of the bees on the top of that slide look like are from the stronger colony. You can do this, and you only need to do it 5 or 6 bees in each colony, and it won't take you any time. And you're going to learn a lot about bee anatomy and a lot about how well you kept bees all fall. Because if your bees look like the slide on the bottom, you didn't do something right. So take a look, do it even before Thanksgiving maybe, but certainly by Thanksgiving in where you are. I do it on Labor Day is when I do this. And I've taken a look because after Labor Day, I got maybe a little bit of goldenrod and that's about it left for me for the season. So if they look like, if my bees look like the ones on the bottom, I wasn't doing something in late summer that I should have been. And now I gotta hurry up and make up for it. So, see, come on, slide. My slide isn't, there we go. If you want to get protein into the colony over winter, now, like I said, you've done that experiment or you've done that dissection and you found out that you don't have enough fat bodies in your colony, you're going to need to get something in there. If you've got pollen and nectar, great. If you don't, then you're going to need a supplement and some honey and or sugar syrup. Here's a trick. We overwinter primarily, I don't, but most beekeepers overwinter in two 10-frame deeps. And in my part of Ohio, it may be less than yours, but in my part of Ohio, two 10-frame deeps with bees and honey and pollen, bottom board, inner cover and cover should weigh 150 pounds or more using a spring scale like you can see here. And if you don't have one of these, this is you take it to the bee yard every time you go, unless you've got one of those electronic monitors that's telling you what your hive weighs. This will tell you, the weight of a hive is going to tell you a whole lot about what's going on inside without you even having to open it. Did it lose weight from last time? Did it gain weight? If it gained weight, how much? Did this one gain more than that one? Did that one not gain any and everybody else lost what? It's going to tell you a lot without having to open the colony. So get one of these kind of spring scales, 2 deeps, honey, pollen, bees, comb, frames, bottom board, inner cover, 150 pounds or more. Now that's for Ohio. And in Wisconsin, we went for 165 or more. So I don't know what it's going to be for yours, but I'm going to guess 150 is going to be a healthy weight. 140 you might get away with. But here's the thing. If you know the weight in the fall and you check it in the spring and the colony's dead, then you know you need more. So a couple of years experience will tell you a lot about it. If you got to get carbs in over winter, of course, honey's the best. I use fondant a lot right here, and this I get at a grocery store. It's the stuff that frosting is put on donuts, and it's 99% sugar and about 1% high fructose corn syrup, just enough to keep it soft. And I slice it into, you can see I slice it into chunks like this. I put them in a plastic bag early in the fall, and then I throw them in the freezer. And if I have to feed, I'd grab a bag, throw it on the colony, cut an X in the side of the bag, and I've got those bags are a pound each. I now put a 4-pound slab in a plastic bag instead of a pound. I took this picture when I was doing a pound, but a 4-pound slab into a plastic bag, cut an X in the bag, turn the X down so the bees can get into it, and no bottles, no muss, no fuss, and you don't have to come back and get rid of it until later in the spring. So it's an easy way to feed. It costs more. I look, everything I do, I look at the cost of my labor. I know what I'm worth. And if I can do it this way in 5 minutes instead of using jars and lids and mixing and heating for an hour, guess where I'm going to go? I know what my time's worth. I bet you know what your time is worth. If you have to emergency feeding, you can do dry food, you can do fondant, or you can make the heavy syrup. There's a million recipes for this stuff on the internet. Just put in winter syrup and you'll come up with something that works for you. The picture in the middle, there isn't enough money to make me ever do that, ever want to do that, or ever gonna do it. That's way, way, way too much work. These other two are way easier, and to make a candy board. But it's something you can do, and if you got time and energy and resources. So, honeybee nutrition, enough good food all the time for every bee in the bunch. Bon appetit, folks. Thank you for your time and attention. I'm going to stop sharing and let you take over, okay?
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. We are, if you have a few minutes, we would love to have people funnel some questions and we will go ahead and just, if you can type a message, we will go ahead and just start shooting questions at Kim. Anybody have any questions?
I see one here. My colonies are getting light. Do I start feeding or wait for a fall flow? You know how long farmers stay in business if they bet on the weather? I'd never bet on the weather. I get weather on my phone, and I watch television, and I listen to whatever, and I don't ever bet on the weather. If you're going to wait for a fall flow, what if it quits raining today and you get no fall flow? And meanwhile, your bees are running out of food, ran out of food. So, yeah, you put the food on, and if you get a fall flow, you can always take it off. But if you don't get a fall flow, then you've got food into them now rather than wait another 2 weeks or 3 weeks before they run out. I saw some questions come in when I was talking there. You got some there?
Okay. Yeah, so we had a question from Valerie. She says, can you please repeat, do you place the entire 4-pound plastic bag of fondant on one hive?
Yep. It's in a gallon, food bag, and I got it sealed on one side when I throw it in the freezer, and when I take it out, I just cut a big X corner to corner on both sides, on one side, put the cut side down, and get out of the way. It'll start thawing in about a half an hour, and by this time tomorrow it'll all be soft and ready to go, and there'll be more bees on it, you can imagine.
And Larry wants to know, what is the nutrition content of goldenrod? Do you know?
That's a good question, and it depends on the goldenrod you've got. We've got types here in Wisconsin. We had 3 types. We had a flathead, we had a plumose, and we had one that was kind of hanging over down like this. And one of the things I used to work at the bee lab in Wisconsin. That's where I got my start in bees. And one of the things that we found, 2 things about goldenrod pollen in Wisconsin now. We found out that if it didn't rain in July, you wouldn't get honey in September. You would get flowers, but you wouldn't. The nectaries in goldenrod flowers are forming in July, and if you don't get water, the nectaries don't form. You get the flower, but you don't get nectaries. And bees, you look out at this field, and it would just be, 10 acres of goldenrod, and there'd be 4 bees out there. And what we narrowed it down to was that it was the nectaries that were doing that. We also found out that the flat top were given a choice. The flat top goldenrods were more attractive than the plumose, or the ones that were hanging over. And we never took it to the point of examining the quality of the nectar or the pollen. But when you've got 3 choices and everybody's on one, you can kind of figure bees know what they're doing. So we always said with a wink and a nod, the flat tops are the best, and they probably are, but there you go.
Let's see. So somebody had asked, what is the magnification you used of the dissected bees? Do you know?
I didn't catch, what is the magnification for what?
The photo of the dissected bees. I believe it was where you were showing.
Oh, the fat body?
Yes.
Are you going to believe I did that with my phone?
Well, there you go.
I took the photo with my phone. I emailed it to myself, and then I just blew up the photo a little bit. So it's how close can you get with your phone and take a good picture? So you don't need equipment.
Okay. Wow. Since honey is the best for the bees, should we take the excess in the summer or wait the excess in summer, or wait until the spring flow and take the leftover honey?
I think what you're asking is, do I save some honey in the fall and feed it back in the either later fall or winter or spring, or did I get that right?
I think what they're asking is, if you have excess honey in the summer, do you take it then, or do you wait until the spring flow and then take over what was left?
Oh, okay.
Jessica, do you want to clarify?
She's shy. Oh, she doesn't have a microphone. She's not shy. Okay. What I would do, and it's only because I have the facilities to do it, is I would take honey in the fall and not harvest it. I would just store it, and I have a place to store it that's bee-proof and cold, and I have winter, so I can do that. That's what, and that way I've got a super or frames that I can put back on either in the winter for emergency feeding or next spring for buildup. I wouldn't leave it on the colony all winter, only because I don't have a good reason, because that's what I've always done. How's that? I can store, I got a place to store it. So and that way it's in a central location, and I don't have to think, is that the colony with the stored honey on it, or is that the colony with the stored honey? That way I just go to the bee yard with a super of honey. If I have to feed, I've got it right there with me. So again, it's time.
Okay. David asked about one of the pictures. It looked like you were using pollen traps to put pollen patties in the hive. Do you ever just slide a patty into the entrance?
I don't know the slide that you're talking about, but I wouldn't do that if that's what it looks like. We saw it wrong. What I do, when I feed pollen that I've collected in a pollen trap, like I said, I throw it in the freezer, and if I'm short on time, which I almost always am, what I will do is I will when I'm collecting pollen, I get a bag fairly full, and then I freeze it. And when I'm feeding pollen, I will take that bag and put it in a colony and cut an X on one side and turn it so the X is up, so the pollen doesn't fall out when it thaws. But that's what they get, and they just go, thank you. So I'm not sure on the pollen trap patty. I'll have to go back and look at the pictures, but that's how I use pollen. I don't spend any time with it.
Do you know the nutritional content of aster?
Of asters? You didn't see them on the list, did you?
Mm-mm.
That tells you something. Most asters are fairly low, and it's because they put a lot of their energy into they put a lot of energy into the flower for pollination. Because there's nothing else out there. They don't have to spend, this is what I'm told by people who know pollen and flowers. Because of the time of year that they bloom, bees will visit anything. So they don't have to put a lot of energy to attract them from another flower source, because there's not another flower source out there except probably goldenrod. So they don't put a lot of energy into creating their food. They put their energy into getting their seed set quick right now, because it's going to be winter tomorrow. So that's from an aster's point of view, or from a bee's point of view, aster pollen is on the low end. But again, if you don't have any, it's better than nothing at all.
True. Zachary Miller of NC State. Did I see well that you can actually put plain sugar crystals as winter feed?
Yeah, you saw the pictures with sugar on the inner cover, and they'll eat it. It's food. They have to have water to mix with it, and in my part of the world, where it's cold enough to worry about, there's always water in a hive in the winter. It's running down the sides, it's collecting on the bottom. One hopes it's not collecting on the top of the inner cover. If you've done your ventilation right, it's running down the sides and collecting on the bottom. And they will use that water for dissolving sugar, water to drink, water to mix with their honey so they can feed it to their brood, so it's thinner. If you think of a bee tree, when bees are in a tree, there's no roof that's cold, but there is sides that are cold and they're covered with propolis, and that water runs down the sides of the inside of the cavity of the tree and collects on the bottom, and that's what bees use for water in the winter. It's the same thing on your beehive. If you've got an insulated top, it's not going to condense. It's going to get cold on the, especially if you've got your entrance on the bottom. It's going to get cold on the bottom third or so of the hive. Water will condense, and they go down there and get the water for whatever they need it for. If you want to know a lot about beehives or tree cavities and why they are the way they are, Tom Seeley's book, which is called The Life of the Bee, goes into great detail on the advantages of the inside of a tree for a beehive as compared to the boxes that we use. The boxes that we use border on inhumane from a bee's perspective. They're easy for the beekeeper, but they're not good for the bee. Remember, you've heard that here first. So
if you had to plant 1 or 2 forage crops for bees, what would they be?
some kind of legume in a heartbeat, a mixture of legumes. If I had a 10-acre field, I'd have 3 legumes on it. I'd have an early blooming clover, a mid-season clover, and a late clover in 6 plots, so that I'd time them so that the early blooming, so it's staggered. But legumes, without a doubt.
How many hives do you run?
How many do I have this year? I'm down to 3. And to me, that's manageable. I retired last year. I'm an old, tired man. and more than that was more than I wanted. But when I was at Bee Culture Magazine, we had 4 there, and I had 5 or 6 here all of the time. But I'm down to 3, and that's good. I've got Italians, Carniolans, and a yellow what do you call it? A yellow Italian, and they're pretty and they're fun and they're not a lot of work. Although we've had a good honey flow this year. I'm gonna make about 80 pounds a colony, I think.
Wow. That's great.
Well, I have to lift all that.
Maybe just 1 frame at a time. Do you freeze your supers, your entire supers?
I don't have to freeze them. I let them sit in the garage. 0 is a common denominator temperature here in December.
Let's see. Do you have advice on the best way to feed honey that's not in frames? I have some extra honey I could feed now instead of sugar water, but it's not in frames. But does have some scraps of comb here and there.
Yeah, if you're comfortable with the hives that it came from, that it doesn't have fall brood or a pesticide contamination, you can just make a honey syrup. Mix it. It's 80% sugar and 20% water. So you do the math and come up with either 2 to 1 or 1 to 1 honey mixture and water. And now 48 beekeepers are yelling at me saying never do that. I've done it a lot. I've never had a problem. And what they worry about is feeding back foul brood or pesticide contaminated or something. But if I got 5 or 6 frames worth of honey, I'll mix it up as a honey syrup.
I'm making notes here. What is the best reference for the crude pollen data?
Oh, there are so many out there because people have studied this. Just Google it, and you'll probably find it. You'll find some website. I haven't done it in a long time, but when I was doing it, I just Googled, protein content of white sweet clover pollen, and you'll find 10 references to it. It's been so well studied that I don't even,
Just Google it. Okay.
Yep.
Zach wanted to say thank you. What do you do with the frames that have uncapped honey and you shouldn't leave them on the hive because you want to reduce the space for winter?
What do I do with frames of, and why don't I want to leave them on the hive?
You're reducing your space for winter.
I just add a super and put them up there. If you add a super and put them on top, bees may never get to them, but they won't rot, and they don't, you know. I guess what I'm looking at is keep it simple. I don't limit myself to two. I have all my bees in 8-frame mediums, and I may winter in 4 or 5 8-frame mediums with the top 2 with honey and or uncapped honey in them, and the bees down below them in the cluster. When I was in Wisconsin, there was a law that said you had to overwinter in 2 10-frame deeps, and the guy that I worked with at the bee lab up there just thought that was nuts, and I think he's right. In my opinion, he's right. It's you know, I don't want to store them in the garage because the mice will get to them, maybe, or not. I can put them in the garage, but I just put them on top of a colony. But you don't have winters like I have, so therein lies the difference. Ask Dave Tarpey what he does.
What are your thoughts on having no ventilation in the top at all? Where I'm from, Sweden, they run polystyrene boxes and a clear plastic inner cover.
And I'm going to guess that you don't have much ventilation in the top. And if you've done it, if you look at a tree hive, if you look at a tree cavity, you've got walls that have about an R11 or 12 factor. The box that you put your bees in, the wooden box that you put your bees in, is R0.75. So bees have to work really hard to keep that brood nest warm because there's no insulative value to the walls. And because they have to work harder to keep it warm, they've got greater air circulation going up to the top. And if you don't have an insulated cover, it's going to hit the bottom of that inner cover, condense, and drip down on them. With the polystyrene hive, I've got 2 of those. I had 2 of those at work, by the way. I like them a lot. With a polystyrene and a really well insulated cover and an entrance on the bottom, that's where it's going to be the coldest in the colony, is where that entrance is. And the water vapor from the cluster is going to move and condense on the walls, and the walls are covered with propolis inside of a tree. And if you were smart, you'd let them cover yours with propolis and let the water run down, collect in the bottom, and bees can use it all winter. Polystyrene and wooden hives are difficult for bees to attach propolis to, and every time you went to open a colony, you'd be swearing at somebody for having all of this propolis here. So I'll go back to, if it's good for the bees, it's probably not good for the beekeeper, and vice versa. So I like those polystyrene hives. When we used those 50 years ago, a well-insulated some kind of polystyrene equipment in Madison, and we could, without much trouble, that's the way it worked. The water ran down the sides, but there were winters where they didn't cluster because it was warm enough in the colony they didn't have to. It was so well insulated. You're never going to see that with the pine boxes we have.
And I think this is our final question. Zach just wanted to follow up, and he was asking about the uncapped honey. Would it ferment during the winter, or perhaps would pests get to those frames if you left them on?
Well, I don't worry about fermentation in the winter because it's so darn cold. If it was warm, it might happen, and for all intents and purposes, I don't care very much. If it ferments, the bees will clean it out and they'll use the space. And if it doesn't ferment, they'll finish ripening it in the spring. I'm pretty lackadaisical when it comes to honeybee management. I'm much more prepared to let them do what they want than me try to get them to do what I want them to do. You'll find it's a lot easier.
Well, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Kim, for speaking.
Well,
Oops, sorry. Thank you so much for your patience and being with us tonight.
okay, well, it was nice meeting all of you. I see a name with a crossed-out microphone, but all of you, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a good harvest and a good winter. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Kim.